much more active in the women's college program currently, but I serve on the UWW referee commission, and I put these presentations together based on the current United World Wrestling set. With that said, I do expect some small tinkering of the rules going into 2023, but nothing huge. And I can't really speculate what that'll be. A lot of it has to do more with the challenge procedure and some of that protocol. But with that in mind, this is the rules as they sit today. And I just wanted to go over some general concepts, what we teach our referees to look for in terms of how they apply the rules. Just want to make sure you guys understand, when we get into these videos and we're evaluating these actions, there's some concepts that you have to understand. First off, in freestyle wrestling, you're either standing or you're in parterre. There's no in between. You're standing, you're obviously on your feet. If you're in parterre, you're on one or both knees. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that one wrestler is in control of the other wrestler. It certainly can be, but it can certainly mean that you're also in a neutral position on the mat. Parterre wrestling is grounded wrestling. And you won't see that term in the UWW rulebook, grounded that is, but I think it explains what we're looking at rather well. The other position that we have to understand is the danger position. Basically, if you go to your head, elbow, or shoulder while your back is less than 90 degrees to the mat, you're in danger. And that's going to be one of the standards we're looking for when we're evaluating certain actions. We get caught up sometimes in the vernacular of what we do, like the expression feet to back. That's not necessarily accurate. Feet to danger would be a more concise statement. If I do a double leg takedown and you land on your backside with your arms outstretched, that's only 2 points. Now, if you do the same position, but your elbow goes to the mat, now that's 4 points. So just understand the difference there. Feet to back is not the same as feet to danger. The other thing is understand the points of contact. This is most critical when we're evaluating takedowns. Your hands, your head, hands, and knees count as point of contacts. The other one that I should add to that list as well is the elbow. So the rule states that if to score a takedown, you must pass behind your opponent, behind their hips, while they have 3 points of contact with the mat. That can includes 2 hands and a knee, 2 knees and a hand, two hands and a head, or an elbow as well is included in that. Now, there's certainly specific situations that maybe don't fit this specific rule very well. We'll get into those here later on here when we get to takedown. And the last thing is amplitude. Basically, if the defensive wrestler's hips go above their chest, that's considered grand amplitude. So when we're evaluating actions, generally lifting actions or actions from the feet, we're trying to determine amplitude, and that will determine whether it's 2, 4, or even 5 points. Any questions on those general concepts? All right. We'll get into the grounded situations. I bring this up because there seems we struggled with this as a refereeing body last year, and we're trying to clarify this as best as we can. Grounded is obviously going to determine whether a step out is scored or not. So if a defensive wrestler establishes a grounded position in the center wrestling area prior to going out of bounds, then a step out should not be valid. It should not be scored in most situations. I can't think of any exceptions, but that's the general rule. But you have to understand what grounded is. And we were just talking to Coach Steiner. You have to understand what we're looking for in terms of, I call it the spin drill position. Do we still do spin drills? Yeah, where one wrestler that is considered the offensive wrestler, their chest is on the back of the defensive wrestler. that too is considered grounded. That's considered par terre. So that's going to dictate not only whether or not a step out is called or not called, but also whether or not we allow action to continue if they spin out of bounds. Because now they're in par terre, we evaluate par out of bounds a little differently. So with that said, I'll get into some videos here. And I'm hoping they're coming through pretty clear on your end. You can see the blue wrestler's on her knees. So she's in par terre and she goes out of bounds. So she's grounded. There should be no step out, no points scored in this situation. And she established that position in bounds, certainly a lag there from going to her knees to going out of bounds. So therefore, no step out should be called in that situation. Is this commonly called incorrectly? Absolutely. And that's why understanding the rules will give you guys a little bit more ammunition if you have a challenge available at whatever events you're attending. Another example here. Again, kind of a scramble situation. Both wrestlers end up going to their knees. Again, now blue's completely out of bounds before she secures the takedown. So she's not able to score. They're both in grounded. No points would be the proper call here. Again, we'll just look at that one. Red's defending. Blue doesn't secure a takedown. I mean, it kind of looks like blue maybe lifts and then red steps out while she's off her knees. But I think, no points is probably the best call in this situation. That might be a situation, since blue is in a dominant position, where you'll commonly see that called 1 point. Again, some of these situations are kind of 50-50, can go either way. We generally tell our referees, if you're not sure, award the points. Reward the wrestler who's taking some risk, low risk or risk, it's risk nonetheless. But, obviously, in a tight match like this, that point there, if it is scored a point, might determine the match. So, it's something you might want to consider challenging if you understand this rule as it's written. But according to UWW, this is a grounded situation. They would score this no points. Now, this is a situation. She doesn't really establish that position in bounds. If you go back to it, she doesn't go to her knees until she gets pretty far in the actual passivity zone there, and then she goes out. So since it's more or less a continuous action going out of bounds, she doesn't really establish being in par terre. They should score the step out as properly as they did in this situation. This is what I alluded to before, this sort of spin drill position. You're going to see blue's on her knees. Red is, her chest is on the back of blue. So blue's bearing red's weight in this situation. Just right here. So now she's in par terre. Both athletes are technically in par terre. So red is allowed to go out of bounds with both feet, assuming her chest and upper body is in bounds. That's what we're looking at in a par terre position. Now, if I turn the sound on this video on, the referee blew her whistle and actually scored a step out for blue incorrectly. Right, so that's what we're looking for. That's what we teach our referees, is to look at how each wrestler, how the top wrestler is basically putting their weight on the bottom wrestler. This situation, red is on top of blue. She should be allowed to go out of bounds with both feet because she's in par terre and her upper body's in bounds, so she is technically in bounds. The correct call, if the whistle had not been blown, is 2 red for a takedown in this situation. kind of similar. It kind of catches you off guard here a little bit. You think she's going to step out. She actually goes to a knee. So she's in parterre. Red's in parterre. Now her chest is on top of blue's back. She should be allowed to finish this action, in which she does. 2 points red. Well, looks like the referee's calling him out of bounds. But in any case, if it's scored correctly, this should be a takedown. Any questions on the grounding action and what we're looking for?
On that last one, her
Sure.
foot stepped while she was still on her foot, and then she went to a knee.
Maybe you saw something I didn't hear. Let's.
Maybe it just looks like it.
Yeah, I can see what you're looking at. That's a valid art, like right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe your toes right on the line there. That's a good. If I had a different angle, yeah, it might show something different. Good point. Absolutely. But based on this angle and the fact that he didn't call it and he seems in good position, I think, just understand the logic behind the rule for sure. Is this something you're going to challenge in the first period? It's 2-0, probably not, but you never know. Now, the question is, okay, so they let this go. Red comes on top. You're the blue wrestler and red rattles off 3 laces. And now you might want to challenge, right? So keep that in mind, but understand with the challenges, and we'll get to later on, there's a time component to it as well. So unless she rattled and immediately transitioned into some other attack and rattled off a couple turns, it would be a hard situation to challenge. All right, out of bounds. All right, what we're looking for from the standing position is the entire foot has to go into the protection area to be considered out of bounds if both wrestlers are standing. There's obviously some exceptions to the rules. UWW is always going to reward dynamic wrestling. And so we'll get in a few of those situations here as we go along. But in any case, tried to throw some unique situations here. You're going to see this red athlete. He's actually going to, excuse me. Yeah, right here. See him, he comes down, he posts a hand out of bounds. One hand out of bounds. Since he's sitting now, he's in parterre. So his upper body's still in bounds. He posted that hand out of bounds, but one hand out of bounds is not out of bounds, assuming your upper body's in bounds, because that's what we talked about. If you're in parterre and your upper body is in bounds, then you're in bounds. It doesn't matter if you post 1 or even 2 hands theoretically, as long as your upper body is still in bounds. So 2 red is the proper call in this situation. Now, what you might see in a situation like this, and something that especially we have a problem with our younger referees, is they get a little antsy on the whistle with our out of bounds situations. So if they would have incorrectly scored this 1 blue, for example, and I'll just show the situation one more time. If they have blown the whistle when he posts his hand out of bounds and scores this 1 blue, certainly something you probably want to challenge. The problem is, and I just understand, and I know I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but whistle stops all action. So even though red may have finished a takedown here, if the whistle had been blown incorrectly, the action stops at that point. If it's challenged and we can hear the whistle, which we can't always have audio, but if we did, we'd have to cancel the 1 point blue that was scored incorrectly. And no points would be awarded. We just restart the match standing. So these are some of the things you got to take into account. But from just a purely rules standpoint, this should be scored 2 red. This is from this year's Pan American Championships. This was a blown call, to say the least. But they ended up scoring this 2 red, I believe. And it stood. There was no challenge even in this situation. But if you go back, watch red. As she comes to the mat, she posts with 2 hands out of bounds and her upper body is out. And then she gains control. So if this is scored correctly, it should be 1 blue. but it wasn't. And obviously with under a minute left in the match, this is something that would have to be challenged. And I'm not sure if the two red blue is still ahead on criteria. I'm not sure, but in any case, this should have been an easier call for our referees, honestly. Well, let's see what we got here. Yeah, kind of this whizzer position here. You're going to see her post that hand again out of bounds, but her upper body's out of bounds at the same time. So she's out of bounds. One more time. She's going to post right here. So one blue should be the right call. This is one of those situations, if you're under attack and you step 1 foot and then finish your attack, it's valid. 4 blue should be the right call here. Next situation, lower left, is this one. Kind of a slower action, but nonetheless, should have been scored 4 red. And I apologize for the poor text there. 4 blue in the top right, 4 red for the bottom left. Any questions on that, guys? 1 foot continuous action, we should allow that to continue. But again, we have issues sometimes with our younger referees, less experienced referees. They get so hyper focused on the step out going out of bounds that they kind of forget about the action that got them there. So certainly we're going to teach our referees to award the highest points possible in most of these situations.
So real quick, I have a question, Casey.
Sure.
How much, what is the type of criteria you're looking for in that out of bounds, the upper body out of bounds portion? Is there like 50% of their upper body, 2 arms?
Basically the pinning points. So
Okay.
basically, bottom of the shoulder blade, cut a line across the chest. That would be what we're teaching our referees. It's somewhat gray and vague in the rules, but upper body means the pinning points, and the pinning points being any area from scapula through the shoulder area.
Got it.
Now, obviously we all come from well, I shouldn't say all, I'd say most of us have experience in the folk style realm, whether it's wrestling, coaching, or being a fan. Just understand that there's a lot of situations in the freestyle rule set that don't mesh with our folk style rules. One of those being the merkle position, the leg inside position. Just a quick example. Not a takedown yet. In this situation, the red athlete has to clear that leg, pass behind the hips for it to be 2 points. We generally give the top athlete here as much time, knowing that she's in a somewhat dominant position, but with that leg inside, UWW's philosophy behind this is basically the bottom wrestler is still defensible. They can still defend that action. There's no control. And that's something I should mention as well. The word control is not defined in the UWW rules. We have situations that in our minds characterize control, but there's no such thing as reaction time. That doesn't exist in what we do. It's either you meet the criteria for a takedown or you don't. And so the merkle, according to the rules as of November 23rd, 2022, is still not a takedown. Now, with that said, here's some unique examples. We'll look at the one on the left here first. You're going to see Blue's elbow hit the mat, right? You see her left elbow, we'll check that one more time as she goes out of bounds. You're going to see her elbow hit the mat. So she doesn't go to danger because her back isn't less than 90 degrees, but because she hits the elbow as she's coming down, now it's 2 points. It's kind of one of those unique situations. Sometimes it's really quick. They hit that elbow and then boom, they're going right into some sort of defensive counter. But if the offensive wrestler has the legs, defensive wrestler goes to an elbow, that should be scored too. Situation on the right is the converse here. She has the leg, but you notice that red doesn't go to her elbow. She just sits. So the only logical call in this situation, one on the right is one blue for the step out. She doesn't go to her elbow. So that's the referee's incorrect in that situation. Well, maybe not. Maybe it looks like a red coach challenge. So he was upset about something. Any case, that's what we're looking for in that situation, those hard kind of leg attacks going out of bounds. This one's kind of fun. Again, now she's in parche. Now they're standing, right? This is a continuous action going out of bounds. I mean, we could argue it a couple different ways, but she's in a good position. As they're falling, she gains control. So 2 points would be the best call in this situation. If you don't call 2 points, she's in that quad pod, she's technically standing, right? So if they go out of bounds in that position, red at a minimum should get 1 point. But since you go to the mat, red's in control, 2 points is the best call. So blue is an activity time and failed to score. So red gets 1 point there. What I wanted to show in this situation is anytime you see a hand-to-hand action while one wrestler has the legs usually, that indicates control right here. You notice how we go in hand-to-hand? That should have been scored 2 points blue. Remember, all turns are 2 points. So this is kind of one of those unique situations. I have it under takedowns, but you could look at it from the perspective that it's really a turn. And so if I have control of your body and through the scramble, I force you to go hand to hand, it should be scored more often than not 2 points. All right, the cradle is something that is a unique position. Obviously, if I have a near side cradle and you're not able to defend, meaning you're not grabbing onto my leg, that is scored 2 points. Now, we teach our wrestlers near side cradle off to the side. And we have some of those athletes that have really long arms and they can lock up a cradle from the front. We want to see them not only lock up the cradle, but get to the side. That to us, that indicates a position of control. Now, if they have the cradle, but the defensive wrestler's still defending a leg, they're not going to score it quite yet. What's critical is oftentimes they'll lock up the cradle and then go into a turn. If it's scored correctly, it should be 2 points for the takedown, 2 points for the turn, 2 and 2. But oftentimes one of those twos gets lost in the shuffle. So you just got to understand the logic here. So the first situation, you're just going to see blue lock up her cradle and then go directly into a turn, and then ultimately gets a fall out of it. But right there, she has 2 points. She's sitting, she has the cradle, and then obviously the turn and the fall. Now, when I'm talking about defending the leg, red has the cradle, but you'll notice blue is actively defending the leg. So there's no points yet in the situation on the right. That's what we're looking for in that specific situation. Even though he's flat and defending, he's still defending really well. That's why red can't, get better control. All right, just a quick quiz question here. So if they score this correctly, if you watch this, I'll show it one more time. Blue's obviously on the attack. Right here, she posts and her back is less than 90. There's 2 points for the takedown. The question is, does she come back to a defendable position? This is the key here. Does the red wrestler come back to a defendable position? I think you would probably see this more often than not, scored 2 points for the takedown and then ultimately 2 points for the turn. But if you notice that red never gets back to a fully defendable position, her chest never comes completely flat back to the mat. It's still a slight torque. She's trying to get back, but she never does. And then there's the turn. So just kind of a unique situation. Like I said, you probably see this scored more often than not, 2 and 2. But if it's scored correctly, it should just be 2 points for blue. All right, as we get into evaluating some of these other holds, 2 or 4 points, the one thing to keep in mind, this is kind of just a general flow chart. Oh, that is my voice. I stole this from another presentation. So you get to hear me explain this slide. For now, I'm just going to leave this up there. What are we looking at? Is the defensive wrestler in parterre standing? Did they go to danger or not? And was there amplitude? The couple unique situations. Lifts where the defensive wrestler rotates in the air are all 4 points, regardless of how the defensive wrestler lands. All turns are 2, takedowns are 2, and step outs are 1. So keep in mind, the offensive wrestler can be on their knees and still score maximum 4 points. I think they would have a hard time scoring 5 points from this situation, but they can be on their knees and score 4 points if the defensive wrestler is still standing. So that's what we're looking at, the defensive wrestler's position, not the offensive wrestler's position. So let's just take a look-see here. So the blue wrestler's on her knees, but red is standing. And she goes to danger. So it should be 4 blue. Next situation. I don't know what you guys call this growing up. We called this kind of looks like we call this a chest crusher. But the question is, was red on her feet or on her knees? She was on her knees, so 2 points. This is a unique situation. You'd be tempted to call that 4 points. She's on her feet, but she goes hand to hand. Let me just, since she didn't hit an elbow, shoulder, she didn't go to danger. Only 2 points. And then probably another 2 points for the turn. Any questions on some of those situations? All right, there. Just got a couple more examples here. blue's initial attack, but red clearly this is the one doing the kipping over. But watch blue. She never goes to danger. It's really close. Did she expose her back or not? We'll watch it one more time. Now you kind of know what you're looking for here. But if you look at this really close, blue never goes less than 90. She just rotates through. So it's only 2 points for red. You could technically call that a correct hold more than anything. Next action on the right. Kind of attack, counter attack. So red starts it here, blue's on her knees. 2 points red, then blue immediately counters you as red lets go. Now she has open hands while blue has an active hold. So the best call here, 2 red, 2 blue for that situation. That's what we're trying to tell them to look for. Does the athlete who takes the leg attack maintain control of the legs? And as they're going through, she lets go, and then blue is now on the attack. So 2-2 would be the right call in this situation.
Can you play that one again, Cody?
Sure.
Or Casey, sorry.
Oh, you owe me a cup of coffee. Call me Cody. It's all right. So the initial front headlock here is a valid hold. 2 red, and then right, my timing was off there a little bit. Do it one more time. But as after red does the roll here, you're going to see her let go of that hold while blue has the legs right there. And she's in danger. So 2 red, 2 blue. Now with that front headlock, if she's able to get more lift before she starts to rotate, you might think 4 points. But she just kind of takes it to the side, doesn't really get that lifting action to make it a standing action. Okay, I have a couple situations of attack, counter attack. Out of all the things in the freestyle rule set, this is one of the more difficult things for judges, for referees. Out of bounds being the other one, as well as evaluating passivity. So I'll just kind of give you some general ideas of what we teach our referees to look for when they're trying to evaluate these situations. Kelly, you get to hear me talk again. I'll let you guys kind of look through this. Maybe, can you hear my voice on the back end there?
No,
I'm sorry, I stole this from another presentation. I narrated the presentation, so I'm hearing myself talk in my ears. But basically, if the attacking wrestler maintains control of the legs throughout the action, we're going to give the benefit of the doubt to the attacking athlete. If the action changes direction, now we're thinking counterattack. They'll get the most points. If the attacking wrestler loses the lock on the legs, meaning what we call open hands, now we're thinking counterattack as well. If I'm shooting a leg attack and you stop my motion, then you're looking at defensive wrestler getting the most points. If the defensive wrestler lands flat on their shoulders throughout the action, meaning they're not able to turn as they're going to the mat, we're probably thinking the attacking wrestler. And if the head is inside, I shoot a head inside double, and then you see some sort of action from there, I'm not able to finish my leg attack, you're probably thinking counterattack. But when we're in doubt, and you're just not sure, we're always going to give the most points to the wrestler who's taking that risk. That is just a important underlying philosophy that's been with Olympic styles forever. We're going to reward risk. So this situation that you're going to see first, this is kind of a unique situation. The offensive wrestler is going to be on her knees, but the defensive wrestler is standing. And then you'll see a counterattack, and then ultimately blue will regain control. This is a classic 4-2-1 situation. 4 for blue. Then you see the counterattack. You saw the open hands from blue as she was being rolled through. And then ultimately blue comes back out on top for the reversal. 4-2-1. If you look at the situation on the right, kind of see that change in direction. We'll show that again here. Let me go back. Red's able to stop blue's initial attack, and then you see that change in direction. And then ultimately blue is able to counterattack. So 4 red, 2 blue would be the right call because she stops that initial arm throw. She brings her across, and then blue is able to finish her counterattack because red let go. So 4-2 would be the right call. You might see that it scored 4 red, 1 blue occasionally. But in any case, the most important thing to understand here is there's a change in direction. Red was able to stop the initial arm throw attack. Then you saw the change in direction. She should be rewarded 4 points. That's the biggest thing to understand here. All right, just wanted to briefly touch on risk in correct throws. You know, obviously risk is something we talk a heck of a lot more, and correct throws for that matter, in Greco-Roman, but it certainly can happen in freestyle and women's wrestling as well. So just a couple examples. When do you typically see this? You know, head and arm attacks, arm throws, arm spins, you know, right there. You saw red try the head and arm. Blue just kind of landed on top. She defended the attack, but really didn't do much. She didn't stop red's motion to the mat. So there's no block attempt. So it's risk. Referee asks for risk, must get confirmation from either the judge or the mat chairman. Either one of those two can confirm that for it to be a valid call. If you look at the situation on the right, you know, we kind of call that a half-ass attempt, pardon my language, but simulation. You know, blue was in good position. She was attacking. They're in contact with one another. Red just kind of tries something, but blue is in good position. This should be scored 2 blue. I showed this example on the right because there used to be kind of this mentality that if the wrestlers landed head to head, and then one wrestler, the defensive wrestler, the wrestler not trying to hold, pass behind, that it should be scored 2 blue. That is not the case. In this, you know, red makes a decent attempt. Yeah, they land head to head, but that doesn't matter. Red's the one that should be rewarded for risk. If this is scored correctly, it should be scored as risk, commonly called a slip throw, and they should restart standing. Look at this situation on the right. Now red does a little better job of defending that. She kind of, there's just a slight pause as she's going to the mat. She defends, blue tries to get up and get away, but red's actually brought her back to her feet and then actually brought her back down. So 2 red would be a better call here. So just some subtle differences. What do we teach our referees? One, if a wrestler tries a throw and their motion is impeded back to the mat, their momentum stops through some sort of counter attempt, then we're going to score it as a block. But if the wrestler doing the throw, if their knees touch the mat before the other wrestler comes on top, probably going to be risk in most situations. Now, I showed you some situations from the standing position. Understand risk can happen from parterre as well. In freestyle, you might see that on a front headlock, for example, or a gut wrench. If there's no viable attempt to block the offensive wrestler, we can call that a slip and bring them back to standing as well. Just wanted to briefly touch on correct versus incorrect throws. The biggest thing here is you have to see the defensive wrestler lose control and land flat on their stomach or on their side. So not enough to get 4 points because they didn't go to danger, but they landed flat. This will be scored 2 points as a correct throw. This one is a pretty classic example. She rolls over, she lands flat on her side, 2 points for blue. Whereas if you look at the situation on the right, blue makes a good attempt, but red lands on his hands and knees. He never goes flat, no points. Certainly, if you're the blue athlete in that situation, you're going to challenge if you have a challenge available, but it would be denied. Well, it wouldn't be denied. It would, the challenge, the call would stand in that situation. All right, just want to briefly get into passivity. You know, it's really hard to teach passivity without showing you minutes of wrestling at a time. Passivity is a process. It's not something you can just show a 10-second clip and say, okay, this wrestler's being passive. But certainly want to make it clear that if you're on activity time, in this situation, for example, red is on activity time. Red is obligated to score. If red fails to score within those 30 seconds, and it's a hard 30 seconds, if they can't score in those 30 seconds, then blue's going to get 1 point, one additional point to anything else they might score in that 30-second time frame. Okay, red scores though. She scores 4 points, nice throw. Activity time is now canceled. All right, blue's going to go on activity time here. I'm going to jump ahead here. All right. Okay, red scores 2. Blue's still on activity time. Or they scored at 4, it looks like. In any case, blue failed to score. Red's going to get 1 more point here. And you'll notice too that that extra point took a long time. Well, now there's a step up. So the score should be 6-1. These are all little things you got to take into account. And I'm not sure how they restarted the match. Hopefully got this all figured out. But in any case, the passive wrestler has to score within that 30 seconds. Now, what do we teach our referees when it comes to passivity? I'll get back to that in a second. Obviously, it's something that it's a tool we're going to use in low scoring matches, especially 0-0. If there's no score by the end of 2 minutes of wrestling in the first period, we're obligated to put somebody on activity time. We try to teach our referees to get 3 passivity calls in a period in a low scoring match, meaning one wrestler has a verbal warning and one wrestler has a verbal warning and has been put on activity time at least once. Going into the second period, that gives us some more flexibility. Theoretically, if the score is just 1-0 after the end of the first period, and that 1 point being from an activity time, in most cases, you're probably going to see the other athlete go on activity time, but that's not something we teach. You base that decision based on who's being passive and who's being active. So you can either look at it from the standpoint of one wrestler's being inactive, they're not trying to make viable scoring attacks, or you look at it from the opposite standpoint, one wrestler's being really active, they're making good attempts to score, And by process of elimination, the other athlete now is passive. So a lot of things that we into account here, but certainly in low scoring matches, this is something we're going to utilize. I guess in my experience, generally, especially in the women's college ranks, athletes go out and score. So you're not going to see passivity used as much, which is great. I mean, nobody watches wrestling to watch two wrestlers who aren't scoring points. But in any case, this is something we'll use in lower scoring matches. Or if it's clear that one wrestler is just really maybe trying to protect the lead and they're not actively wrestling, head is down, butts back, they're not maintaining center mat position, grabbing wrists, holding on to wrists, hands, grabbing fingers. Those are all things that we'll take into account when we're evaluating who's passive and who's not.
Casey, how much do you take into account controlling the center of the mat?
In freestyle wrestling, I actually taken that into account a lot more than Greco. A lot of Greco actions involve turning your back and allowing that wrestler to come into you. Whereas in freestyle, especially with your leg attacks, it's usually they're going forward. So we take a little bit more precedence in freestyle of maintaining center mat position, but it depends on other factors as well. Body position. Are we grabbing hands and wrists? Are we trying to get angles? Are we lowering elevation? I try to sometimes emphasize the 7 basic rules of wrestling. And if the wrestlers aren't using those sorts of techniques in their attacks, then obviously they're probably being passive. So, but yeah, center mat position is critical. What we probably look at more than anything, though, is if one wrestler keeps working their way to the edge of the mat and then deciding to wrestle. So that's probably what we, in terms of mat position, what we try to emphasize more is who's taking the wrestling to the zone. And if one wrestler just kind of backs up to the zone and then decides that they're going to wrestle, we're going to try to see through that and not let them fool us into thinking that they're being active.
Okay.
So quick quiz. Okay, I'm going to stop it right here. And so you've seen it one time. Red's on activity time. Then you saw red try an attack. Blue landed on top. You saw the judge actually score it, but nothing went on the board. So we'll watch it one more time. So here's my opinion. To me, that's risk. Now, I'm assuming, I'm going to jump ahead here just to see what they did. Okay, here's the problem. Like it's 0-0 on the board and red's challenging. So I think the red coach is probably thinking to himself, he let that action continue. They must have scored it to blue, which maybe they did, but it never got on the board. So that's the first problem. That's referee mistake. But the biggest thing that you have to keep in mind in this situation is if this is called risk, then we have to do two things. We have to reset the clock to when risk happened, the match clock, as well as the activity time clock. There's two things that have to be changed there in this situation. So they'll take the points off the board and they'll put time back on the clock at the point at which the slip throw occurred. So these are all, if you're a coach in this situation, something that you have to take into account and make sure they correct. because sometimes they get kind of caught up in just the points. You got to get it caught up with the points and the time. And certainly if you're the blue athlete, or excuse me, if you're the red athlete on activity time, you want to have as much time as possible back on the clock so you have the chance to score. So that's why this is on there. Wanted to make sure that you're taking all of those parts into your mindset here. All right, I think we're all familiar that going into 2022, UWW updated Fleeinn the mat and Fleeinn the hold calls. Just a quick flow chart of the penalties. Just keep in mind, Fleeinn the mat and Fleeinn the hold, standing or in parterre is caution and 1 point. If they're in the standing position, we're going to do everything as a refereeing body to make sure that we stop the match and give them a verbal warning first. The only exception for Fleeinn the mat where it's caution and 2 points is if the defensive wrestler is in the danger position. They're being pinned and they flee the mat. It's caution, 2 points. What's also critical to understand is that we're always going to put the athletes back in the position in which the foul occurred. So if the foul occurred in parterre, they're going to restart parterre. If it happened standing, they'll go back standing. If the foul happened in danger, they're clearly in parterre. We're going to put them back in parterre as well. So a couple examples here. This is a fleeing the mat call, but the active wrestler, the wrestler taking the risk is able to finish their attack. So the takedown is going to remain valid. It's going to be caution, 1 point. But since he finished the action, they're going to put him back in parterre. The thinking behind this is if they would have finished that takedown inbounds, then the blue wrestlers earned the right to be on top in parterre. He scored points. So if they flee the mat and he's able to finish his takedown, they're going to put him back in parterre because he's earned that position. Sometimes the referees get a little bit rushed in this situation. And especially if one referee among the three doesn't call it fleeing, then there seems to be a little bit of confusion. So you got to kind of pay attention. In this situation, the referee just made his call, but now you see the judge calling it a flee. Now it's up to the mat chairman to confirm one or the other calls. And if he doesn't confirm the flee, then the flee can't happen. Mat chairman must confirm all cautions. So he's kind of the head cheese there. So that's just one example. Now it could be a 2 point takedown. Theoretically, it could be a 4 or 5 point throw too. Any action that scores out of bounds, if there's a takedown to it, you score the points, caution 1 point, restart in parterre. This is more classic example. You're going to see an attack here, excuse me, and the red athlete's going to be facing out of bounds and more or less runs off the mat. I will say this, 99 out of 100 times that will be called a flee. Anytime you're defending an attack and you're facing out of bounds and you go out of bounds in a straight line, it's going to be called a flee more often than not. So in this situation, it's 1 point for the step out, caution red, 1 blue for the flee, and they'll restart standing since he wasn't able to finish her attack. The other thing that we have to keep in mind in this situation is grabbing or interlocking the fingers. You can defend the wrists, you can defend the hands here, but the minute you interlock fingers to defend, you're peeling fingers, that's a foul as well. And now that's more negative wrestling. So that would just be caution in 1. Doesn't really change the situation here because you're still going to have a step out, caution in 1, restart standing, but something to keep in mind if you're in that situation. And I always get the question from athletes, so, well, how am I supposed to defend that attack? Because I don't know what to tell you. All I can tell you is that interlocking the fingers is against the rules, no matter what position you're in when you do it. And if we catch you doing it, we're going to penalize you for doing it. It's, especially internationally, it's a huge, huge deal. again, she goes off the mat under attack. Now, if I have a high single and you go off the mat, more often than not, that's not going to be considered a flea because I have control of that leg. Now, if I have a high single, you turn and you kick out of bounds, now it's a flea. Again, you're facing out of bounds, you go out of bounds. But if I have a high single and you bounce off the mat, that should only be a step out. Again, another classic example, right? Runs off the mat, she's facing out of bounds. This is one example. I threw this on here. I wanted to show you. This is close to being a takedown, but you're going to notice that the red wrestler starts to fall. Blue actually, he's trying to like drag his feet. It's like a wide receiver trying to keep his feet in bounds, sort of. But the red athlete doesn't start to fall until blue's both feet of blue are out of bounds. And like I said this to coach earlier, we have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. Once both feet go out of bounds, if that red wrestler had been falling in bounds and then landed out of bounds like that, we're probably going to score it for blue, or at least score the takedown. But in any case, you'll notice that the red athlete doesn't start to fall until he's well out of bounds, and then blue gains an attack. Generally, more often than not, if you see all the marketing posters off to the side get bumped into during an attack, they're not going to score maximum points just because they have had 2 feet out of bounds. So there's that kind of quirk in the rules. You're just going to see blue kind of purposely go to her knees here to avoid the step out. Now, blue is in parterre, right? She goes to her knees and then goes out of bounds. So in this situation, it would still be fleeing the mat. Caution blue, 1 red. But keep in mind, blue's in parterre when she goes out of bounds. So now we're going to restart parterre. All right, so no step out, but caution blue, 1 red, restart parterre. Situation on the right.
Play that again. Yeah.
Sure. There's some subjectivity to this. Do you think the blue wrestler purposely went to her knees and then went out of bounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I certainly think so. I think the critical thing here is that if they call it a flea, as a coach, you have to realize that she went out of bounds in parterre, so they need to restart in parterre. And that's obviously a huge advantage for the offensive wrestler. So if we look at this, sorry about that. Now, to me, that's just red actively defending the shot. So I tried to find an example that was kind of similar to the previous one, but different just enough. Yeah, she goes to her knees, she sprawls, but she's actively defending a shot. So, excuse me. So in this one on the left, fleeing a mat. The one on the right, no points, no step up. All right, I kind of mentioned this one in terms of fleeing the hold. Generally something that we're talking about when one wrestler's trying to defend a small lead. It's obviously something we're talking about with less than 30 seconds in the match. Now, our preferred protocol with our referees is to give that wrestler who's fleeing as much the benefit of the doubt to defend their lead legally. So if they start to flee, we're going to stop the match and give that wrestler a verbal warning. And the terminology that should be used is center and contact. And you'll see the referee kind of make you need to stay in the center, you need to stay in contact. That's kind of the hand motions that we use. They'll restart the match, and if the wrestler continues to flee, the referee is mandated to stop the match with time on the clock. That's critical. And then award caution in 1 point. Now, there is a little bit of a stipulation in the rules, at least in the application of the rules, that says that if there's less than 10 seconds, there's probably not enough time to give a verbal warning, and you can go direct penalty. I'll be honest with you, don't see that very much. We as referees want the wrestlers deciding the match. So like I said, even though this is a tough call and we'll make it when we have to, we're going to try to build that verbal warning into it more often than not, if we can. So just a quick example to see what I'm discussing here. The referee does a really good job. You can see her kind of jumpy. She's defending the attack. She's not engaging. So blue gets a verbal warning. And blue's actually going to score a step out here. Kind of one of those deals, you know, blue gets a point there. Now, as a referee, honestly, this is an easier call. It's 3-1. So caution in 1, it's just going to be 3-2. We haven't changed a winner. So this gets to be a much easier call, but she's clearly fleeing, and the match is stopped. Notice time is on the clock. That's one thing to keep in mind, is if the time runs out and that call isn't made, you can challenge all you want. You certainly have that right, but you're not going to win the challenge. It just won't happen because time ran out, and they're not going to change the winner after time runs out. All right, just want to get into some general things. I just got a few more slides here, so appreciate everyone's patience. This is kind of a unique situation. I just wanted to clarify that 2 hands on the head with no arm encircled is illegal from the bottom or from a standing position. This is kind of a unique situation. Anytime we have offensive fouls in a match, if the defensive wrestler is able to score from that foul, that should be a valid call. We're not going to take those points away from that wrestler because the other wrestler committed a foul. So you'll see here, red's going to, I believe it's red, is going to put 2 hands on the head here. Oh, blue right there. You saw it already, but she's actually going to bring red down to the mat with 2 hands. But then red immediately counters. So blue cannot score here. She committed a foul, 2 hands on the head, but red can still score 2 points because she didn't do anything wrong. So if this was scored correctly, red would get 2 points. The referee would probably stop the match and give blue an attention for the foul. If she commits that similar foul later on in the match, she'll be immediately penalized, caution in 1 point for an illegal move. You know, the one thing obviously we're dealing with women's, right? You saw it right there. I should have gave you a little bit of warning. I'll show it again. He's grabbing here. You know, red's obviously defending. You see it right there. You guys see it with red's right hand. This is a direct penalty since she's actively defending an attack. This will be caution red, 1 blue. If they just kind of grab the hair through normal wrestling, we'll give them a warning first, but clearly if they're using it as a defense mechanism, it's a direct penalty. You see it there? This is getting a little aggressive as it is. But it became a problem in this specific match because see it right there? If I pause it right. It's never good when the athletes commit a foul like this. It's not stopped, and then ultimately she ends up scoring. And ultimately, this got a little bit, well, 2 more points, but I had to deal with the coaches after this match, so that's why it's on here. But and then you got kind of an illegal toe grab there. But in any case, obviously we're looking for the fouls there. So you got one situation on the left that's a direct penalty, grabbing hair for defense, and then another situation here where the athlete match should have been stopped, blue given a warning, and then if she continued after, then she'd be penalized. Just want to clear this up too, because this is one difference between the Olympic styles and the scholastic wrestling. Figure 4, or what's termed as scissors. Scissors and figure 4 in the UWW language is the same thing. The only thing you can scissors or figure 4 in international wrestling is one leg or one arm. Anything else is against the rules. And if it's done defensively like it is in this situation, immediate penalty, caution, 1 point. And because they're in parterre, they'll go back to the parterre position. You know, just because it's in my head and I'm thinking of, you guys go back to the Seth Gross matches at the World Championships in the semifinals, this hurt him ultimately. And it was a scramble situation. We've all seen him wrestle. He likes wrestling in those positions. Ended up being scored 2 blue, 2 red. And then ultimately only 2 red, which is his opponent only got 2 points out of the deal. It was ended up being challenged while they watched it on a challenge. And it's clear that he crossed his legs during that and held it. You know, one thing if they touch, but if they touch and cross and hold, obviously now it's a penalty. So it ended up hurting him in the end, but it is a foul, and just got to make that clear. Kickbacks in freestyle, as long as it's not done with excessive force, are legal. More often than not, they're done legally. I have seen one instance from the European Championships about 3 years ago where the defending athlete jumped up and then did the kick out. Just want to make that clear that kickbacks are a legal maneuver in our styles, as long as there's no brutality involved.
Is there any illegal variations of it? You know,
Yeah, I could have showed you kind of the situation that I referenced before. She actually, you know, you got to make sure that when you're doing the kickback that you're hitting the crotch of the knee, the back of the knee where it bends. If it gets off to the side and you kind of kick in from outside in, now you're going against the joint. So that would probably be the biggest concern I would have. I got a couple situations, just unique situations, and something it's important to understand in our rule set.
hey, real quick, Casey.
Go ahead.
To clarify, even in that kickback, if the defensive wrestler is hooking with their foot the far leg and scoop the near leg with the hand, hook the far leg with their foot, scoop the near leg with the hand, that's still legal, correct?
Still legal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. In terms of technical superiority, the athletes, once that 10-point difference is attained, the athletes have to come back. The rule states they have to come back to a neutral position. And so just, you know, this was, both of these situations are from the European Championships, and you know, high level event, and some of our best referees in the world are still kind of making these mistakes. But in any case, okay, so blue gets 2 points there. It's 10-0, but notice they're not back to a neutral position yet. And then red's going to come back out on top. You know, and ultimately should score something there. But the referee by that point has been told by the match chairman to blow the whistle. And this situation, honestly, on the left is from a different event. But in any case, the referee stopped the match. It's 10-0 when in fact red was in a position to score there, and they hadn't come back to a neutral position. So wrestling should have been allowed to continue there. have to teach wrestlers to finish their actions. And so that's kind of the logic behind it. Situation on the right here, I'll just kind of let this play out, but this should be scored 2 red, 2 blue. But they only score it 2 blue or 4 blue. So we'll just watch it one more time here. It's blue's attack, but you're going to see that kind of chin whip here. Stops the attack. In any case, they gave blue all the points here. Red obviously is going to challenge. If they don't challenge, they lose the match. And ultimately, it ends up going back. It's a 10-2 situation, and wrestling's allowed to continue. So just want to make that clear that, yeah, there might be a 10-point difference there, but if they haven't come back to a neutral position, meaning both athletes are chest down, face to face, no active score in progress, then they should stop the match. Skip ahead here. Lastly, it's important that we understand the verbiage that our referees are using as coaches and as athletes, obviously, to know what we're referencing. And in freestyle, we tend to talk a little bit more just because there are more dynamic attempts. But we generally tell our athletes to start with the color and then the command. Action is self-explanatory. We need more scoring attempts. Open means you have to allow your opponent the opportunity to attack the body or attack the legs in freestyle. So if you're clamming up, especially in parterre, we're going to tell you to open. You can certainly, from a standing position, clam up as well. It means you're not attacking the torso, you're not working underhooks, you're not working angles, you're not allowing your opponent to generate a lock. That certainly can happen as well. Action, attack, those are self-explanatory. No fingers, again, get your hands off the fingers, quit grabbing hands. Attention is just a warning, like pay attention. Usually an attention, there's something that follows that up. Zone is that 1 meter circle on the outer edge of the mat. If your wrestling takes you to the zone, we'll say blue zone, red zone, just kind of giving you a warning that you're near the protection area. Center means obviously work yourself back to the middle of the mat. And place is the term we use. It's similar to zone, which we use from the standing position. Place is the term we use when you're near the out of bounds, but in parterre. So those are the most common. You'll also see no block. That means, you're kind of wrestling in that traditional tie up position here where you're blocking with your forearm or maybe blocking with the crown of your head. That would be one. You might also from this position, or if you're blocking with your head, again, you're not allowing your opponent to generate a lock. We may use the open command or commonly just say head up. And the other thing we teach our referees, especially when we're dealing with American athletes, is just talk to them, tell them exactly what you're looking for. You don't necessarily have to use UWW vocabulary. Or if there's a break in the match, maybe they go out of bounds or just a natural stoppage, you might see the referees say something to them as they're going back for the restart, back to the center of the mat, just to kind of give them a heads up on what they're doing wrong. Is there any questions, folks? I left my email on the bottom. You can certainly reach out to me anytime. And I know Coach Steiner and Coach Medina, we're going to record this and send this out. So hopefully everything comes through clearly. I can't cover everything in the rule set, but I certainly hopefully did a good job of covering the biggest nuts and bolts of what we did.
Hey, I did have 2 questions. Maybe it's better asked off session, but it's about a couple positions we didn't necessarily go over.
Go ahead.
So the first one, I guess it was covered up in the fleeing position from the parterre. Think kind of the know where you're at type of rule. One wrestler has another in the lace close to the edge. the one getting laced maybe shoots head out of bounds because that's where they're at, and that forces a stand up generally. Is there a situation where that could be called fleeing?
Yeah, similar to fleeing the mat from a standing position. If you're in parterre and you can see the out of bounds, and especially if they're doing like a donkey kick to defend that lace, I think you more often than not see that called fleeing the mat. Yeah, it's just important to get to the edge of the mat like that. And I realize defending a lace, you kind of gotta inch forward, but you get to where that out of bounds, you better turn. At least show that you're making some sort of attempt to stay on the mat.
Gotcha. And if you're there, you can just go ahead down and restart without penalty.
Yeah, just be careful. Like that's one thing that our referees are good at catching is, okay, if your head's off the mat and then all of a sudden it kind of just you kind of put your head out of bounds, that could be called fleeing the mat as well. Yeah, so I realize they might not have anywhere to go, but just that action of kind of plopping your head down to get a whistle, they may oftentimes call that. Whether it's the right call or the wrong call, that's they only see what happened last, and that's you putting your head out of bounds. So I wouldn't advise that.
Gotcha. Second situation was kind of, I guess, when it would be called to. Let's say one wrestler has another in a double leg. The defensive wrestler kind of locks up a body lock, and now they're on their butt. Kind of think back to the Steve or Oliver type of situation.
Yeah.
At which point is it called to, even if offensive wrestler is elevating back as close to the mat, that kind of thing?
Sure. So that sitting position's kind of unique. So if you're in on a leg attack, single or double leg, and you're sitting and the defensive wrestler's hunched over, maybe in like a chest lock, maybe you can picture that. That's not 2 points yet until the wrestler posts back with their hand and their back is less than 90 degrees. That would be a 2. Or if they're in a chest lock and the wrestler with the legs kind of drives into him, is able to get the lower back of the defensive wrestler to contact the mat, at that point, they'll consider that 2 points as well. So that's a unique situation, that sort of chest lock position. The chest lock itself is not considered a position of control yet. You have to see either they post their hand with their back. So if they just kind of post their hand forward or to the side, that's not 2 yet either. They have to post and their back has to be less than 90 degrees, or the lower portion of their back has to contact the mat.
Got it.
I did have one quick question as well. With the fleeing in a pinning combination, at what point is it, hey, it's a little bit like an upgrade to your did a throw right to the back or right on the out of bounds line? The only option is to bridge and you end up out of bounds. At what point is that discretionary?
Yeah,
because we struggled with that one when that call came out. In order to keep that safe.
Yeah, I think this is what we teach, how it's applied. I can't say from one referee to the next, but if the action that put the wrestler to their back happened in the zone and the defensive wrestler doesn't have anywhere else to go, then it shouldn't be called fleeing the mat. But if the action lands in the center wrestling area, especially if you see that high bridge and then they use that bridge to kind of go off the mat, that should be called a flee. Yeah. I would say, especially when you're dealing with high level international events, is more often than not, if a wrestler's being pinned, they go to a bridge, they go off the mat in the bridge, they'll call that a flee more often than not. But I also understand the concept too, that if you get thrown to your back in the zone and you have 6 inches before you go out of bounds, what else are you supposed to do? Right. So I probably wouldn't call that a flee myself, but certainly you're going to hear the referee be telling you, if you're being pinned and you're blue place. And if you go out of bounds, you're kind of at their mercy a little bit. But there's nothing in the rules that really strictly says this is fleeing, this is not fleeing. All it says is that if you're actively being pinned and you go off the mat in that position, it could be called fleeing the mat.
So perfect. Thank you.
Anything else, guys, gals, coaches?
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Casey, for taking the time.